Silent screams at midnight in the hotel. The rain pounded against the windows of the Blackwood Hotel, its rhythmic tapping swallowed by the eerie silence that had settled inside. The ancient building stood at the edge of the city, its towering structure a relic of a bygone era. Guests were scarce, and those who did stay never remained for long. There were rumors, stories of things that slithered in the dark, whispers in the dead of night, and of course, the silent screams. Eleanor Parker pulled her coat tightly around herself as she stepped into the dimly lit lobby. She had been traveling for hours and needed rest. The man at the front desk, an elderly figure with sunken eyes and a hesitant smile, handed her a tarnished brass key. Room 306. She thanked him and took the creaky elevator to the third floor, her tired body eager for sleep. As she walked down the hallway, an unsettling sensation crept over her, an inexplicable feeling of being watched. The wallpaper was faded and peeling, the sconces flickered as though struggling to stay alive, and the scent of dust and something faintly metallic filled the air. She brushed it off, chalking it up to exhaustion. Inside the room, the bed was surprisingly well kept, the furnishings old but elegant. She locked the door, exhaling deeply as she fell onto the mattress. Silence stretched across the room, the kind that weighed on the ears. Just as sleep threatened to claim her, a sound broke through the hush, a whisper, so soft and fragile it could have been a trick of the wind. "Help me." Eleanor bolted upright, heart hammering. She scanned the room, but there was nothing, no one. Just shadows stretching eerily across the floor. She swallowed, shaking her head. Fatigue was playing tricks on her. She lay back down, staring at the ceiling, forcing herself to ignore the residual unease. Then, at exactly midnight, the silence shattered. A scream erupted from the hallway, piercing, desperate. But something was off. It was muffled, almost as if the sound had been swallowed before it could fully form. Eleanor shot up, rushing to the door. She pressed her ear against it, holding her breath. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, slow and deliberate. She hesitated before turning the knob and peering outside. The hallway was empty. No sign of the source of the scream. A shiver ran down her spine. She stepped out cautiously, glancing both ways, and noticed something odd. The air felt heavier, thick with an unnatural chill. A door at the end of the corridor stood slightly ajar. Light flickered within, casting long, dancing shadows onto the hallway floor. Against every ounce of logic, Eleanor moved towards it, drawn by something she couldn't explain. She pushed the door open wider, revealing a room identical to her own. But there was something horribly wrong. The bed was in disarray, as if someone had struggled. The mirror above the dresser was shattered, its fragments reflecting the dim light in jagged angles. And then there was the chair in the corner. A figure sat there, facing the wall. Unmoving. Eleanor took a shaky step forward. "Hello," she whispered. The figure twitched. Her breath hitched. It was slight, barely noticeable, but she had seen it. A tremor, a faint motion of something not quite right. The air grew even colder, her skin prickling with an invisible touch. Then, slowly, so agonizingly slowly, the figure's head turned. What she saw stole the scream from her throat. The face was blurred, features shifting like water disturbed by ripples. The mouth opened, a gaping void of nothingness, and yet she felt the force of a silent scream, a cry so powerful that it pressed against her chest, suffocating her. The lights flickered violently, shadows lengthening, twisting into shapes that had no place in reality. Eleanor stumbled backward, her mind screaming at her to run. The figure rose, movements jerky and unnatural. Its head tilted, the silent scream intensifying in her mind, a crushing weight of pure, unfiltered terror. With a strangled gasp, she turned and bolted. The hallway stretched unnaturally long, darkness swallowing the end of the corridor. She could hear it behind her, its silent cries filling the space, chasing her, grasping at her sanity. She reached her room, fumbling with the key, hands shaking so violently she could barely force it into the lock. The moment the door clicked open, she threw herself inside, slamming it shut. Her chest heaved, her back pressed against the wood. Silence. No footsteps. No whispers. Nothing. And then, the mirror above the dresser cracked. She turned, watching in frozen horror as the fissures spread, webbing out like veins. And from the darkness of the fractured glass, something watched her back. The silent scream began again. Suddenly, the room was bathed in darkness. Eleanor gasped as the air turned ice cold, her breath visible in the oppressive blackness. The shadows slithered along the walls, converging toward her. She tried to move, but an unseen force held her in place, pressing down on her like invisible hands. Then, a voice, hollow and distant, whispered in her ear, "You shouldn't have come back." A rush of memories flooded her mind, memories she didn't recognize. A different life, a different time. The Blackwood Hotel. A tragedy. A woman who looked just like her, screaming, reaching out, and vanishing into the very walls of the place. Eleanor's own voice joined the silent screams as her reflection in the shattered mirror twisted into a monstrous grin. Her body stiffened, her vision blurred, and then, all at once, darkness. When the morning came, the hotel was silent once more. The old man at the front desk looked up as the housekeeper approached hesitantly. "Another one?" she asked, her voice weary. He sighed, nodding. "Room 306. Just like the others." The door stood ajar, the room eerily untouched. But Eleanor Parker was gone. Only the cracked mirror remained, its reflection shifting ever so slightly, as if something inside it was waiting for the next guest. The cursed hotel's nightmare, a tale of lost souls. The rain poured relentlessly on the deserted road as Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. The storm had come out of nowhere, and his GPS had failed him hours ago. He had no choice but to keep driving, hoping to find shelter for the night. That was when he saw it, a towering hotel, its neon sign flickering ominously in the distance. Black Hollow Inn. Something about the place felt off. The architecture was grand, reminiscent of a time long gone, but the air around it was suffocating, as if the walls had absorbed centuries of suffering. Still, with the storm growing worse, Daniel had no other option. He parked his car and stepped inside. The lobby was eerily silent, save for the ticking of an antique clock. The receptionist, an elderly man with sunken eyes and an unsettling grin, greeted him. "Welcome to Black Hollow Inn," the man said, his voice a low rasp. "You'll be staying the night, I presume?" Daniel hesitated. The way the man spoke, it sounded less like a question and more like a statement of fact. Still, exhaustion won over his instincts. "Yeah, just for the night." The old man handed him a tarnished brass key. "Room 306. Sleep well." Daniel ascended the grand staircase, his footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing strange, dark stains underneath. At the end of the corridor, he found his room. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit space with antique furniture and a musty scent that made his stomach churn. As he set his bag down, he noticed a portrait hanging above the bed. It depicted a family, mother, father, and 2 children, all dressed in Victorian-era clothing. But their eyes, they seemed too lifelike, as if they were watching him. He shuddered and turned away, blaming his overactive imagination. The night was restless. At exactly 3:06 a.m., a sharp knock jolted him awake. His heart pounded as he listened. Another knock. Then another. Slowly, he got up and approached the door. "Hello?" he called, his voice barely above a whisper. Silence. He exhaled, convinced it was just his nerves, when suddenly, the door handle rattled violently. Daniel stumbled back, fear gripping his chest. He grabbed his phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Then, the whispers began. Low, guttural murmurs seeped through the walls, surrounding him. The air grew heavy, thick with an unbearable presence. The portrait above his bed, he could have sworn the figures had shifted. Their mouths were twisted in silent screams. The whispers turned into wails. The lights flickered, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. Daniel grabbed his bag, ready to bolt, but the door wouldn't budge. He pounded against it, screaming for help, but his cries were swallowed by the void. Then, silence. The room was still. Too still. Shaking, Daniel turned around. The figures in the portrait were gone. The frame was empty, save for the faded outline of where they once stood. A breath brushed against his ear. Run. Daniel didn't think twice. The door suddenly gave way, and he sprinted down the hallway, past empty rooms and broken chandeliers. The walls seemed to close in on him, the whispers turning to shrieks. As he reached the lobby, the receptionist was gone, and the antique clock had stopped ticking. He didn't stop running until he was outside. Rain lashed against his skin as he fumbled to get into his car. The engine roared to life, and he sped away, not daring to look back. The next morning, Daniel pulled into a gas station, desperate for a moment to breathe. As he told the attendant about the hotel, the man's face paled. "Black Hollow Inn?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "That place burned down 40 years ago." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. He turned back to the road he had come from. There was nothing but an empty lot, and the faint echo of a whisper in the wind. Run. Daniel's mind reeled. Had he imagined it all? He rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of it. Then, in his rearview mirror, he saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the gas station lot. The same lifeless eyes from the portrait bore into him. His breath caught in his throat as the whispers returned, echoing in his mind. "You can never leave." A cold hand clamped onto his shoulder from the back seat. Daniel screamed, and the world went black. When the gas station attendant stepped outside minutes later, Daniel's car was still there, engine idling, driver's door open. But Daniel was gone. Only the wind carried his final whisper. Run. Forgotten secrets in the abandoned hotel. The wind howled through the empty streets as Daniel parked his car in front of the decaying structure. The Blackwood Hotel had been abandoned for decades, yet it still stood like a looming beast, its cracked walls and shattered windows whispering of forgotten horrors. He hesitated before stepping out, gripping his flashlight tightly. The stories surrounding Blackwood were legendary, a luxurious hotel that mysteriously shut down overnight in 1953, leaving no trace of its guests or staff. Some said it was cursed, others claimed it was haunted. Daniel wasn't one to believe in ghost stories, but he was a journalist, and his job was to uncover the truth. As he pushed open the heavy wooden doors, the scent of mold and decay hit him like a wave. The grand lobby, once filled with life, was now a silent graveyard of broken furniture and tattered wallpaper. His footsteps echoed eerily against the marble floor. A chill crawled down his spine as he shone his flashlight over the dust-covered reception desk. Papers lay scattered across the surface, as if someone had left in a hurry. A guest book caught his eye, its leather cover cracked with age. Flipping through its yellow pages, he noticed something strange. Every entry stopped on the same date, October 17, 1953. No checkouts, no further notes. It was as if time had frozen. Then he heard it. A faint whisper. His breath caught in his throat as he swung the flashlight around. The beam of light landed on a staircase leading to the upper floors. The whispering had stopped, but the air felt wrong. He climbed the steps cautiously, each creak under his weight sounding like a gunshot in the silence. Room 207. The door was slightly ajar, swaying gently as if inviting him in. Holding his breath, he pushed it open. The room was eerily preserved. A suitcase lay on the bed, clothes neatly folded inside, a cup of tea still sitting on the nightstand, now reduced to dust. Whoever had stayed here had left in a hurry, but never returned. Suddenly, a sharp knock came from the closet. Daniel spun around, his flashlight flickering. The door creaked open, revealing darkness within. His heart pounded as he stepped closer, bracing himself. But just as he reached for the handle, the closet door slammed shut on its own. The whispering returned. Closer. Louder. This time, voices. Help us. Don't let it find you. Daniel stumbled back, his mind racing. He needed to leave now. He turned to run, but the hallway outside the room was different. The walls were no longer decayed, the carpets no longer rotting. The hotel was alive again. And so were its guests. Dressed in 1950s attire, they walked the halls, their expressions blank, their eyes vacant. Daniel's breath hitched as a woman in an elegant evening gown turned to face him. Her lips parted, but instead of speaking, a low, guttural growl escaped her throat. The others turned as well. Their faces twisted in agony, their bodies moving unnaturally, like puppets on invisible strings. Something was wrong with them. Panicking, Daniel dashed for the stairs, but the moment he reached the lobby, everything flickered back to decay. The guests were gone. The whispers, however, remained. Then he saw it. Behind the reception desk, a large, ornate mirror stood, one that hadn't been there before. And in its reflection was not Daniel, but something else. Something watching him. Smiling. The last thing he heard before the world turned to darkness was a voice, cold and merciless, whispering in his ear. "Welcome back. Mysterious hotel story." The heavy rain pounded against the windshield as Daniel Grayson pulled into the parking lot of the Black Hollow Inn, a secluded hotel nestled deep in the misty Appalachian Mountains. The old structure loomed in the darkness, its once grand Victorian architecture now veiled in decay. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie red glow across the soaked pavement. Exhausted from hours of driving, Daniel grabbed his duffel bag and made his way to the entrance, shaking off the unsettling feeling gnawing at the back of his mind. The lobby was strangely empty. A musty scent of aged wood and mildew hung in the air. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with hollow cheeks and piercing gray eyes. His name tag read Mr. Holloway. "Evening, sir. Just passing through?" Holloway asked in a voice that was barely more than a whisper. "Yes," Daniel replied, handing over his ID. "I just need a room for the night." The old man nodded, flipping through an ancient-looking ledger. "Room 306. Last one available." Something in Holloway's tone sent a chill down Daniel's spine, but he ignored it. He was too tired to be superstitious. The hallway leading to his room was dimly lit, the faded wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips. The wooden floor groaned under his weight as he stepped forward. At the far end of the corridor, a shadow moved, just a flicker in the corner of his eye. Daniel turned sharply, but there was nothing there. Just the dimly lit hallway stretching into darkness. Inside room 306, the air was thick with an unidentifiable scent, something between damp wood and something metallic. The decor was archaic, heavy red drapes, a brass-framed mirror above the dresser, and an old rotary phone sitting on the nightstand. The bedspread looked as though it hadn't been changed in decades. As he set his duffel down, a gust of cold air swept through the room, causing the curtains to flutter. The window was shut. A shiver ran down his spine. Then, the phone rang. Daniel hesitated before picking it up. "Hello?" A faint, rasping voice whispered through the receiver. "Get out." His heart pounded. Who was this? Static. Then silence. He slammed the receiver down, his pulse hammering in his ears. It had to be a prank. Maybe some local kids messing with the guests. Shaking his head, he decided to take a hot shower and sleep off the nerves. The bathroom was ancient, the tiles cracked, the mirror speckled with age. As he turned on the shower, the pipes groaned in protest. The water was scalding at first, then ice cold, then red. Daniel stumbled back, his breath caught in his throat. Blood swirled down the drain. His stomach twisted, and his reflection in the mirror seemed wrong. His eyes were darker, his skin paler. And behind him, in the dim light, a figure stood in the doorway. He spun around. Nothing. His breath came in shallow gasps. It had to be exhaustion playing tricks on him. He rushed out of the bathroom, grabbing his phone. No signal. The storm outside raged louder. Then, the scratching began. At first, it was faint. A slow, deliberate scraping against the wooden floor outside his door. He moved closer, pressing his ear against the wood. The scratching stopped. A long silence followed. Then a single knock. He backed away. His instinct screamed at him not to open the door. But something inside him, some twisted, irresistible curiosity, made him reach for the knob. Slowly, he turned it and pulled the door open an inch. Nothing. The hallway was empty. But then, from the darkness, a whisper, "You shouldn't have come." A sharp, cold breath brushed against his neck. Daniel spun around, but he was alone. The room felt heavier, the walls pressing in. And then he saw it, the mirror above the dresser. The reflection showed his room, the bed, the old phone on the nightstand. And something standing behind him. A gaunt figure, its eyes hollow voids, its mouth a gaping mound. The lights flickered. A deep, guttural growl reverberated through the room. Daniel stumbled backward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The air thickened, the walls seemed to pulse, closing in around him. Then, everything went black. When he awoke, he was no longer in room 306. He was outside, lying on the soaked pavement of the parking lot. The black hollow was gone. In its place stood the charred remains of a long-abandoned structure, its skeletal frame half swallowed by the forest. His duffel bag was beside him, dry despite the rain. In his trembling hands, he clutched the room key, faded, rusted, and engraved with the numbers, 306. The footsteps of death had led him here. And something told him, they weren't done with him yet. The enigmatic guest, a ghost who roams the hotel at night. In the depths of the night, there was a hotel that seemed abandoned, standing alone in the outskirts of the city. The Mistlewood Hotel had been built years ago in grand splendor, only to fade into obscurity over time. The only thing that remained of its once glorious past was a chilling whisper that could be heard at the same time every night, followed by mysterious footsteps echoing in its hallways. One winter night, the silence of the hotel was shattered. Despite being nearly empty, with only a few rooms still open, the place found itself hosting a small group of guests. Among them was a man, the newest arrival. He was a solitary figure, mysterious and quiet, with little known about his name or past. He had come to spend the night, but little did he know, his arrival would mark the beginning of a terrifying experience that no guest had ever truly escaped. The man entered his room, but something felt off. The air had grown cold, and the darkness seemed to take on a weight of its own. It wasn't just the temperature, there was an unsettling sensation that someone, or something, was walking alongside him in the shadows. Sometimes, faint whispers could be heard through the walls, as if the very stone of the building was alive, murmuring secrets of the past. At times, the lights would flicker on and off for no reason, casting eerie shadows across the otherwise quiet room. The regulars of the hotel had learned to live with these disturbances, but tonight, the air was different, charged with an undeniable tension. As the night deepened, the man lay in bed, unable to shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. At one point, he glanced into the mirror, only to notice a figure standing just behind him. It wasn't quite clear, more of a shadow, moving slowly, but undeniably present. His heart raced as he blinked, but the shadow had vanished, leaving nothing but the cold and silence. The room seemed to be holding its breath. By midnight, a soft knock came at the door. Hesitant, the man opened it, only to find no one standing outside. A strange chill swept into the room as the door creaked open wider. There were wet footprints just beyond the threshold, large, elongated steps leading into the emptiness of the hallway. The man hesitated, but something inside him urged him to follow. Is this hotel truly cursed? He thought. But what he didn't know was that once a person stepped into the Mistlewood, they could never truly leave. Guests, no matter how hard they tried, would always find themselves drawn back into the hotel's embrace. It didn't matter whether they were dead or alive. Once the hotel had claimed them, they were its prisoners. The next morning, the hotel employee knocked at his door. The man woke up, but a lingering fear seemed to grip his heart. When he answered, the employee simply stared at him with a knowing gaze, asking, "How did you sleep last night?" He didn't respond. His eyes drifted to the doorway, where an eerie silence now hung. The employee, without another word, looked at him and added, "You've had the experience. From this moment on, there's no escape. Once you've learned the secret of this place, you're bound here forever." From that moment on, the man never slept peacefully again. Every night at the same time, the same haunting footsteps echoed through the halls. He could no longer avoid them. He knew that no matter how many times he closed his eyes, he would never truly be alone again. For once you enter the Mistlewood, you become a part of its dark legacy. The ghosts that roam the halls, the spirits trapped within its walls, are never in rest. They wander endlessly, waiting for the next soul to join their eternal procession. And every night, those footsteps drew closer, beckoning him to join them in their restless roam. The man had become one of them, the ghostly guests of the Mistlewood, lost to time and trapped in the endless night. The Locked Hotel, when nightmares come to life. On a chilly autumn evening, as twilight bled into night, Evelyn Reed found herself poring over a collection of old letters and faded photographs in the attic of her city apartment. Among the brittle pages lay a peculiar invitation, an ornate envelope embossed with gold filigree and addressed in elegant script. Its sole title read The Locked Hotel, and, at the bottom, a cryptic line whispered, "When nightmares come to life, the truth shall awaken." Intrigued by the promise of hidden secrets and driven by an insatiable curiosity honed over years as an investigative journalist, Evelyn knew she could not ignore this mysterious summons. Her journey led her along winding, fog-shrouded country roads until she arrived at a desolate town on the edge of nowhere. In a creaking diner where locals exchanged wary glances, whispers about the infamous hotel filled the air. The establishment, it was said, had been sealed for decades, its corridors haunted by anguished echoes of guests who never truly left. As dusk fell, Evelyn found herself standing before a towering, crumbling edifice nestled between gnarled trees and barren fields. Once a beacon of opulence, the hotel now wore decay like a shroud. Heavy wrought iron gates and a massive, rusted padlock embedded in the main door guarded its secrets, symbols of both physical confinement and the spectral imprisonment of lost souls. Determined to uncover the truth, Evelyn discovered a side entrance where the lock had been carelessly left ajar, as if the building itself beckoned her inside. With a mix of trepidation and resolve, she stepped over the threshold. The lobby unfolded before her like a cavernous hall bathed in the faint glow of her flashlight. Dust motes danced in the narrow beams while the air reeked of mold and forgotten memories. Majestic chandeliers hung precariously from the high ceiling, their once sparkling crystals now dulled by time. Every step she took echoed through the empty space, as if the building itself mourned a lost grandeur. Room after room revealed relics of a bygone era, delicate porcelain tea sets with chipped teacups, faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her every move, and diaries brimming with entries that hinted at both joy and despair. In one such leather-bound journal, she discovered the desperate scribblings of a guest named Margaret. Her final entries detailed shadows that moved independently and voices that murmured her name in the dead of night, a prelude to the unspeakable terrors that had befallen the hotel's occupants. As midnight approached, the atmosphere in the hotel began to change. A sudden chill swept through the corridors, carrying with it a melancholic melody that seemed to emanate from the very walls. In a forgotten lounge, Evelyn caught sight of a spectral figure reflected in an old mirror, a vague silhouette drifting past, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind the haunting scent of lavender and decay. The boundaries between reality and nightmare started to blur, wallpaper rippled like water and indistinct murmurs grew louder, as if the hotel were whispering its darkest secrets. In one dusty suite, room 217, Evelyn uncovered a collection of personal mementos, a delicate locket containing a faded photograph, a single black glove, and a handwritten note in a trembling script. The note recounted a night of unspeakable terror, a night when guests were tormented by apparitions born of their deepest fears. It spoke of a vengeful spirit, a guardian of secrets, bound to the hotel by a curse wrought long ago by an owner who had delved into forbidden occult practices. With every passing moment, the nightmares seemed to seep from the very walls, taking on a life of their own. Before she could escape, the lights flickered violently and the door slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate within a room that now felt like a prison. Shadows deepened in the corners, coalescing into grotesque forms reminiscent of the tortured visages Margaret had described. The very walls pulsed with a dark, insidious energy, while the air grew heavy with sorrow and menace. In the tarnished mirror, Evelyn saw her own face twist in terror and despair, as if her inner nightmares were being forcefully laid bare for all to witness. Frantically retracing her steps through the labyrinthine corridors, Evelyn discovered that every turn led her deeper into the hotel's tortured past, a past inscribed in letters and documents hidden behind crumbling bookshelves in a forgotten archive. There, she pieced together the tragic tale of an owner whose occult experiments had inadvertently trapped the souls of his guests, cursing the building and dooming them to relive their darkest fears in an endless loop. In a desperate bid to break the cycle of torment, Evelyn resolved to confront the spectral force that had held the hotel in its relentless grip. Her search led her to a grand ballroom, a once splendid room now lying in ruins. Tattered draperies and scattered debris spoke of a time when the space had been filled with life and celebration. At the center of the desolate floor, a solitary figure awaited her, a translucent woman draped in a flowing gown, her eyes brimming with sorrow and malevolence. This was the guardian of nightmares, the very embodiment of the hotel's cursed legacy. In a voice that trembled with a mix of anguish and fury, the apparition asked, "You have come to unearth the past, to awaken what should have remained forgotten. Why do you disturb our eternal rest?" Though terror gripped her, Evelyn found the courage to reply, "I seek the truth not to disturb, but to set you free. You are bound by a curse wrought long ago. Let me help you find peace." For a heartbeat, the spectral figure hesitated, as if the weight of centuries of torment was warring with a fragment of hope. The room shuddered, chandeliers swung overhead and the air crackled with raw, unbridled energy. The guardian's expression shifted from malevolence to profound grief as she recounted a tale of love betrayed and a desperate bid to harness forbidden power, an experiment that had cost countless lives. Each victim's soul had been ensnared, forced to endure an endless nightmare. Evelyn realized that to break the curse, she must not only reveal the hidden truths of the past but also confront the fears buried deep within her own soul. With trembling resolve, she closed her eyes and embraced the torrent of memories from her haunted childhood, the darkness that had always lurked at the periphery of her mind. In that vulnerable moment, the barrier between the spectral realm and her inner self began to crumble. The guardian's eyes softened as the oppressive presence that had held the hotel captive for decades started to unravel. Slowly, the cursed padlock clattered to the floor, its iron link snapping until the barrier was broken. The oppressive silence lifted, replaced by the tentative promise of liberation. Dawn broke over the horizon as Evelyn staggered out of the hotel, the first rays of sunlight banishing the lingering darkness. The once locked doors now lay open, and the oppressive night had given way to the gentle chirping of birds and the rustle of a new day. Though the haunting visions had receded, the experience had indelibly marked her soul. In the days and weeks that followed, Evelyn meticulously documented her ordeal. Her detailed accounts illuminated the tragic stories of those lost to the relentless curse, sparking a broader conversation about the thin line between myth and reality, between our deepest fears and the hidden truths that bind us. The town eventually reclaimed its peace, and the hotel, transformed from a mausoleum of terror into a somber monument of history, was slated for preservation. Its dark past served as a reminder that some doors, once closed, hold stories that must be told. Yet, even as the building became a historical landmark, visitors occasionally reported strange, yet gentle phenomena, a soft glow in a dark corridor, or a whisper of gratitude carried on the breeze. It was as if the freed souls continued to watch over the truth that had finally set them free. In the quiet moments before sleep claimed her, Evelyn would reflect on that fateful night. The locked hotel had taught her that nightmares, however terrifying, are merely shadows of our inner struggles. Only by facing them can we unlock the path to true liberation, and in that revelation lay the possibility of redemption, even in the darkest of places. The Dance of Spirits, the story of the cursed hotel. Fog rolled in from the distant moors as the train pulled into the lonely station at dusk, and rumors had long swirled about the decrepit establishment looming on the hill, the cursed hotel, whose walls whispered of forgotten tragedies and restless souls. Driven by an insatiable curiosity and a desire to unravel mysteries that defied logic, Alexander Hawthorne clutched his worn leather notebook and stepped into the unknown. The gravel drive led him to an imposing structure overgrown with ivy, its stone facade marred by time, while the grand double doors, carved with intricate motifs of spiraling vines and spectral figures, seemed to beckon him inside with a silent, eerie invitation. Inside, the lobby appeared frozen in time. Faded tapestries and a chandelier of tarnished crystal hung above portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes followed Alexander's every move. Each creak of the wooden floor and each sigh of wind through shattered panes set his nerves on edge, yet the true disturbance lay in the unnerving sensation of unseen eyes watching him. As he ventured further, the temperature dropped noticeably, and distant whispers filled the air, merging with the echoes of his own cautious footsteps. At a long-forgotten reception desk, an open ledger revealed entries penned in elegant, archaic script. One particular entry, dated over a century ago and marked with a cryptic note, "At midnight, the dance of spirits commences. The curse endures until the truth is unbound. Sent a chill down his spine, hinting that his arrival was entwined with a fate older than the crumbling walls. Unable to resist the lure of the hotel's secrets, Alexander wandered down narrow corridors lit only by flickering sconces. Dust motes floated in sparse beams of light as he moved deeper into the heart of the mystery, and every step echoed like a heartbeat in the silence. At times, he caught fleeting glimpses of figures, perhaps a delicate gown swirling in the darkness or the outline of a gentleman's top hat, yet when he turned to look, only shifting shadows greeted him. His path eventually led him to a grand ballroom, its vast dome scarred by the passage of time. Tattered drapes danced in a cool, uninvited breeze, and the once polished dance floor bore the imprints of long-departed revelers. At the center of the room, an ornate mirror fogged with condensation revealed images of spectral figures in the finery of a bygone era, their slow, deliberate movements evoking an eternal waltz. The faint strains of a haunting melody seemed to seep from the very walls, merging with the soft, plaintive whisper of his name, a sound both distant and intimately familiar. Compelled by the mysterious call, Alexander followed it down a narrow staircase to the hotel's forgotten archives. There, beneath layers of dust and cobwebs, he uncovered a trove of old diaries, letters, and faded photographs. One diary, bound in cracked leather and inscribed with the name Eleanor Sinclair, drew him in with a magnetic pull. Eleanor's words vividly recounted the hotel's tragic past. It had once been a haven for the elite, a place where lavish balls and whispered secrets flourished beneath candlelight. Yet on one fateful masquerade ball, a forbidden love affair intertwined with bitter betrayal ignited a chain of events that culminated in a catastrophic fire. As the flames died down, a lingering curse took root, binding the souls of the lost to an eternal dance, a sorrowful waltz that replayed their final, heart-wrenching moments over and over again. Her desperate plea, "Release us from this dance of despair, for only in truth can our souls find rest," resonated deeply within him as the temperature in the room plummeted and the air itself seemed to hum with anticipation. With midnight approaching, a palpable mix of dread and hope propelled Alexander back to the ballroom. The spectral figures, once mere shadows at the edge of his vision, had grown vivid and defined, their eyes glowing with sorrow and longing. Among them, a figure in a flowing silver gown caught his attention, her melancholy gaze locking with his in a silent exchange that spoke volumes. As he drew nearer, the apparitions twirled and swept across the dance floor in a ritualistic, sorrowful cadence. The hotel itself seemed alive, guiding him through hidden passages as if eager to reveal its darkest secret. Portraits lining the walls appeared to watch his every move, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama of a tragedy centuries in the making. Deep within the labyrinthine corridors, Alexander discovered a hidden chamber that felt untouched by time. Relics were arranged in a ritualistic display, a shattered locket, a faded photograph of a smiling couple, and a blood-stained letter recounting betrayal and forbidden love. At the center stood an ancient mirror etched with cryptic symbols. As the silver-gowned specter reappeared, bathed in an ethereal glow, Alexander reached out and touched the mirror. In that moment, a vision overtook him, a cascade of images from the fateful masquerade ball, lovers entwined in passion, a rival consumed by jealousy conspiring in the shadows, and the insidious tendrils of malevolent force that fanned the flames of betrayal. The mirror's surface rippled like water as anguished voices of the lost cried out, and the specter's tear-filled eyes spoke of a sorrow that transcended time. It became clear that the curse was no mere myth but a living tragedy, a cycle of despair repeating itself until the truth was finally acknowledged. Determined to break the cycle and free these tormented souls, Alexander meticulously pieced together the fragments of Eleanor's diary, the torn letter, and the relics he had found. As the hour of midnight neared once again, the ballroom filled with an intensity that bordered on the surreal. The spectral dancers gathered in a swirling vortex of light and shadow, their movements synchronizing with the spectral strains of a sorrowful melody. With a resolute heart, Alexander ascended the grand staircase to the center of the hall, where countless ancestral portraits silently observed his act of defiance. Clutching the ancient documents close, he recited aloud the painful truth of that fateful night. "I bear witness to the sorrow of the past. The promises broken, the love betrayed, and the anguish that binds your souls. Tonight, I acknowledge the truth, and in doing so, I set you free." For a suspended moment, silence reigned, a profound quiet that seemed to hold the breath of every spirit present. Then, as if stirred by the power of his confession, the spectral dancers began to slow. The mournful strains of the melody softened, and one by one, the apparitions converged before him in a tender, poignant communion. The silver specter stepped forward, her form shimmering as she extended a graceful hand, beckoning the lost souls to come together. In a final, bittersweet moment, the figures dissolved into gentle motes of light that drifted upward like fireflies on a summer night, the oppressive weight of the curse lifting to reveal a serene stillness that whispered of redemption and closure. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the shattered windows of the ballroom, Alexander stood alone in the quiet aftermath of the spectral dance. The gloom that had haunted the corridors had given way to a fragile hope, a promise that even the deepest wounds could begin to heal. Clutching Eleanor's diary and the remnants of the tragic relics, he realized that he had borne witness to a story that transcended time, a testament to the redemptive power of truth and compassion. In the days that followed, whispers of the miraculous event spread among those who still believed in the echoes of the past, and the cursed hotel slowly transformed from a monument of despair into a quiet sanctuary of remembrance. Though its scars would forever tell of lost love and betrayal, the hotel now stood as a beacon of hope, a reminder that every haunted heart can find solace when the truth is finally embraced. Strange Visitors Hotel. The dense fog had settled heavily over the old roadside hotel, obscuring the neon sign that flickered intermittently. The moonlight had seen better days, its once vibrant exterior now a husk of its former self. The hotel sat isolated at the edge of a long-forgotten highway, a relic of a time when weary travelers needed a place to rest. On this particular night, the air was thick with mist, dampening all sound except for the occasional creak of the old wooden sign swaying in the wind. Inside, the front desk clerk, Daniel, absent-mindedly flipped through a magazine, glancing occasionally at the clock. It was nearly midnight. The place had been unusually quiet, save for the two guests who had checked in earlier, a middle-aged couple on their way to a funeral. The isolation of the hotel never bothered him much, but there was something different about this night. The air felt charged, as if the fog itself carried whispers of things unseen. A sharp chime from the lobby bell broke the silence. Daniel jumped slightly before composing himself. He hadn't seen or heard anyone approach. Looking up, he saw three figures standing in front of the desk. Their presence was jarring, tall, thin, and eerily still. They were dressed in long, old-fashioned coats, their faces partially obscured by the shadows cast from the dim lobby lighting. "Welcome to Moonlight Inn," Daniel said, forcing a polite smile. "How can I help you?" The tallest of the three, a man with pale skin and an unsettlingly hollow gaze, leaned forward. "We require a room for the night." His voice was slow, deliberate, as if he were speaking in a language not quite his own. Daniel hesitated, something in the man's eyes unsettling him. "Of course," he muttered, retrieving the key to room 306. "Just one room?" The man nodded once. "One is sufficient." As Daniel handed over the key, the man's cold fingers briefly brushed his own, sending an unnatural chill through his body. He suppressed a shudder as the trio turned in unison and silently ascended the stairs. Hours passed, but sleep evaded Daniel. The old hotel creaked as if shifting in discomfort. He had tried to push aside his unease, but something about the visitors gnawed him. Finally, curiosity got the better of him. He pulled up the old registry book and scanned the names. His brow furrowed. The space where the name should have been was completely blank. Daniel felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. A gust of cold air swept through the lobby, though the doors remained shut. A faint sound reached his ears, a whisper, unintelligible but insistent. It was coming from the hallway leading to the upper floors. Against every rational thought, he stood and stepped cautiously into the corridor. The overhead lights flickered as he reached the stairwell, the air thick with something unidentifiable. Halfway up, the whispering grew louder, an unsettling mix of multiple voices speaking in hushed, overlapping tones. As he reached the third floor, he stopped. Room 306 stood at the end of the hallway, its door slightly ajar. His pulse pounded in his ears as he moved forward. The whispering intensified, yet there was no one in sight. He reached out and nudged the door open wider. The room was empty. Not just vacant, empty. No furniture, no bed, no lamps. Just an expanse of cold, dark walls. The only sign that the room had ever existed was the door itself, now leading into nothingness. A chill spread through his spine as a voice, clear, distinct whisper from just behind him, "We never left." Daniel spun around, but the hallway was empty. The whispering ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on him like a heavy weight. Heart hammering, he bolted down the stairs, fumbling for his keys, desperate to leave. But as he reached the front desk, he froze. The guest book was open again, the pages fluttering slightly as if stirred by an unseen breeze. He stared in horror as names began to etch themselves onto the paper, one after another, in an old, spidery script. The last entry sent ice through his veins. Daniel Wills, room 306, checked in, never checked out. Hotel of Lost Souls, midnight insomnia. It began on a night when the moon had chosen to hide its face, a night when even the stars seemed reluctant to shine. I arrived at the Hotel of Lost Souls at precisely midnight, my heart heavy with a weariness born not only of endless travel but also of a mysterious insomnia that had plagued my every waking hour. The grand edifice loomed before me like a spectral fortress, its ancient stone walls and intricately carved doors whispering secrets of long-forgotten tragedies. The drive along winding country roads had left me in a daze, and as I pulled up before the hotel's imposing facade draped in creeping ivy and shrouded in darkness, I felt an uneasy chill crawling up my spine. Stepping out of my car, my footsteps echoed in the silence as I approached a heavy oak door, its surface worn by time, each groove and dent testifying to the lives that had passed through its threshold. A single brass knocker, tarnished with age, hung above the door as a silent herald of the unknown. Inside, the lobby was lit by a flickering chandelier whose erratic light cast dancing shadows upon faded wallpaper and creaking wooden floors. The air was heavy with a musty blend of old perfume and dust, and somewhere in the distance, a clock ticked steadily, marking every anxious beat of my heart. At the reception desk, a thin, gray-haired man with eyes deep and sorrowful slid a heavy brass key across the counter. In a voice barely above a whisper he said, "Room 13. May your night be revealing." Climbing the narrow, winding staircase, each step echoed in the silence until I reached the door marked 13. The key turned in the lock with a reluctant click, and as I stepped into the modest room, a single bed covered with a quilt faded by time, a small writing desk, and a window framing the black velvet sky, I felt an inexplicable presence, as though I were not alone. That first night, sleep eluded me. As the hours wore on, the silence was broken only by soft, almost imperceptible whispers drifting from the corners of the room. Initially, I dismissed them as the tricks of an overactive imagination fueled by travel fatigue, but as the minutes stretched into hours, the murmurs grew clearer and I began to see shapes shifting at the periphery of my vision. It felt as if the room itself were alive with memories, a tapestry of voices and sighs that refused to be forgotten. Unable to find solace in restless wakefulness, I donned a heavy sweater and ventured into the hotel's labyrinthine corridors. The hallways, lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow my every movement, exuded an air of despair and longing. Each painting silently recounted stories of loss, and the once plush carpet, now worn to a ghostly whisper of its former self, bore the scars of countless footsteps. Amid these corridors, I felt an inexplicable pull toward a narrow passage shrouded in darkness and humming with a strange energy. It was there that I encountered her, a woman clad in a vintage, flowing dress, her eyes glistening with sorrow yet sparkling with an inexplicable hope. She drifted silently, her presence both ethereal and profoundly tragic. When our eyes met, she beckoned me with a delicate, trembling hand, and I found myself compelled to follow her, as though she were guiding me toward a hidden truth. She led me to a forgotten wing of the hotel, where behind a heavy wooden door lay a vast library, its shelves crammed with dusty journals, yellowed letters, and brittle photographs. The air was thick with the weight of memories. I began leafing through one of the diaries, each page detailing the tormented experiences of previous guests, souls ensnared in the hotel's curse, condemned to perpetual insomnia that robbed them of peaceful nights. Every entry recounted a tale of loss and longing, lost love, shattered dreams, desperate yearning for rest that was forever denied. The diary hinted at a mysterious ritual, a long-forgotten rite that might free the hotel's captives, granting them the rest they so desperately craved. Determined to unravel the mystery entwining my own sleepless nights with the fate of those before me, I retraced my steps back to room 13. There, the ghostly woman awaited, her eyes now brimming with profound sadness. In a voice that seemed to echo from another time, she whispered, "Heed the secrets of this place, and you shall find your own redemption." Her words resonated with the fragments of truth gleaned from the diary, I came to understand that the hotel's curse was inextricably linked with the lives it had ensnared, each lost soul reflecting the pain and regret of a life half-lived. That night, armed with cryptic clues and relics of forgotten lives, I resolved to find the hidden chamber mentioned in the diary, a chamber said to hold the key to breaking the cycle of eternal wakefulness. With only the faint glow of a lantern lighting my path, I roamed the hotel's twisting corridors. Along secret panels behind tattered drapes and hidden doors creaking open to reveal relics of a bygone era, I gathered delicate fragments of the past, a porcelain music box, a faded love letter sealed in a cracked envelope, and a sepia-toned photograph of a family whose smiles had long since dissolved into sorrow. Each object pulsed with a silent energy, as if carrying a piece of the lost soul's anguish and hope. As midnight approached once more, I returned to the secret library. In the soft glow of my lantern, I spread out the relics and the diary upon an old oak table. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and sorrow, and it felt as though the very walls leaned in to witness what might come next. I began to read aloud the incantations inscribed in the diary, my voice trembling with both fear and determination. The archaic words resonated with the weight of countless untold stories. The ghostly woman reappeared beside me, her spectral form illuminated by a soft, otherworldly light. In a moment of transcendent clarity, she recounted the tragic tale of the hotel's long-deceased caretaker, a man who had once sought to bring solace to the suffering, only to become entangled in his own dark ambitions. In his misguided desire to ease the pain of the lost souls, he performed a ritual that instead bound them to the hotel, condemning them to eternal wakefulness. His overwhelming remorse in death transformed him into the warden of these restless spirits, forever tormented by the very act meant to save them. As I recited the final lines of the ritual, the room shuddered with a sudden, intense force. The relics vibrated in unison, and even the portraits in the corridor seemed to soften, their expressions shifting from anguish to tentative hope. The ghostly apparitions that had haunted my sleepless nights gathered around, their once mournful whispers melding into a harmonious chorus, a lament for the past and a plea for liberation. In that charged moment, I felt the weight of all the lost souls and my own sleepless torment converge into a single, poignant truth: to break the curse, one must embrace the pain of the past and offer forgiveness not only to those who had suffered but to oneself. With a final, resolute breath, I allowed my own memories of regret and sorrow to mingle with the incantations, releasing them into the ether. The effect was immediate and profound. The oppressive gloom that had long shrouded the hotel began to dissipate, replaced by a gentle radiance seeping through the ancient stone walls. One by one, the spectral figures faded, their anguished faces softening into expressions of quiet peace. The ghostly woman smiled, a smile that spoke of liberation and the promise of eternal rest, and with her, the caretaker's tortured spirit was finally freed, his burden lifted by the forgiveness he had long denied himself. As the first hints of dawn broke over the horizon, I found myself once again standing in the hotel lobby. The heavy air had given way to a serene calm, and the once menacing corridors now resonated with a subdued melancholy. Outside, the world stirred awake to a new day. I stepped out of the hotel with a heart that felt inexplicably lighter, even as I carried the bittersweet memories of that night like precious relics. Pausing at the threshold, I glanced back at the venerable building. Though its stone walls still bore the scars of past sorrows, an undeniable aura of redemption now enveloped it, a silent promise that even in the darkest of nights, there is a path to healing. In the weeks that followed, I found myself returning, if only in memory, to that night of spectral revelations and quiet absolution. The experience had changed me fundamentally, teaching me that the most haunting nightmares often hide the seeds of redemption. The Hotel of Lost Souls, with its long-forgotten corridors and whispering walls, had shown me that it is only by confronting the darkness within that we can truly discover the light. And so, whenever insomnia dares to visit again, I close my eyes and remember that midnight, a time when even the lost find peace, and I smile, comforted by the enduring resilience of the human spirit. Silent screams, nightmares unfolding within the hotel. The hotel stood at the edge of the city, an imposing structure with a dark past whispered about in hushed tones. Built in the early 1900s, it had once been a luxurious retreat for the elite. Now, its grandeur had faded, leaving behind an eerie silence that clung to the halls like a ghostly shroud. David Holloway had no idea about the hotel's history when he checked in late that evening. He was a traveling journalist, exhausted from a long drive, and the sight of the warm-lit lobby was a welcome relief. The receptionist, a pale, hollow-eyed woman, handed him the key with an almost mechanical motion. "Room 406, she said in a voice that barely registered as human. As he rode the antique elevator to the 4th floor, a strange sensation crept up his spine. The air grew colder, the lights flickered, and for a moment, he thought he heard a whisper. But when he turned around, there was no one there. The hallway was long and dimly lit, with a peculiar musty scent hanging in the air. David found his room and stepped inside, exhaling a breath of relief. The room was surprisingly well kept: a large bed, a writing desk, and a tall window overlooking the street below. But something felt off. A strange unease settled in his chest, though he couldn't pinpoint why. Shrugging it off, he unpacked his belongings and sat at the desk, flipping open his laptop. As he started typing, he heard the faintest sound of whispering. His fingers froze over the keyboard. The sound was coming from the hallway. Slowly, he stood up and moved toward the door. Pressing his ear against it, the whispering grew louder. It wasn't in English. The cadence was uneven, broken, like someone struggling to speak through something thick and suffocating. David yanked the door open, but the hallway was empty. His breath came faster as he stepped out. The whispering had stopped. The only sound was the steady buzz of the flickering light overhead. He shook his head, blaming exhaustion, and turned back into his room. As he locked the door, something moved in the reflection of the window. His pulse spiked. He spun around, expecting to see someone behind him. Nothing. He inhaled sharply and laughed under his breath. "Just tired," he muttered to himself. But sleep did not come easy that night. Sometime around 2 a.m., the temperature in the room dropped drastically. David pulled the blanket over himself, shivering. That's when he heard it: soft, rhythmic tapping. It came from the closet. Tap. 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 His stomach clenched. He tried to ignore it, rationalizing that it was just the old pipe shifting, but then the doorknob of the closet rattled. Slowly, deliberately. A chilling breath of air caressed the back of his neck. He bolted upright, heart pounding. The closet door creaked open an inch, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Then he saw it. A pair of hands, pale and emaciated, gripping the inside of the door. The fingers twitched, as if waking from a long slumber. And then the whispering returned, urgent, desperate, right behind his ear. David scrambled out of bed, knocking over the lamp as he staggered back. The closet door yawned open further, revealing a shape shifting in the shadows. Something was in there. Something that was not supposed to be. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. The whispering intensified, morphing into a cacophony of voices overlapping, pleading, shrieking. His vision blurred as a cold hand shot out from the darkness, fingers brushing against his ankle. That was all it took. David bolted from the room, sprinting down the empty hallway. The lights above him shattered one by one as he passed, plunging the corridor into darkness. He could hear something following him, dragging itself along the floor, whispering his name in a voice that was both distant and painfully close. The elevator was at the end of the hall. He slammed the button repeatedly, his breath ragged. The whispering was right behind him now. Ding! The door slid open just as an icy hand gripped his shoulder. He threw himself inside, jamming the lobby button. The doors crept closed, the whispering seeping through the cracks. And then, silence. The elevator descended slowly, agonizingly slow. When it finally reached the lobby, David stumbled out, gasping for air. The receptionist stood at the front desk, her hollow eyes locking onto his. "You saw them," she murmured. It wasn't a question. David swallowed hard, his body trembling. "Who are they?" he managed to ask. Her lips barely moved. "Guests who never left." A scream echoed from the floors above. David didn't look back.